Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls built out of resentment. But in truth, they are bridges built from self-awareness. Especially later in life, when experience has stripped away illusions, boundaries emerge not as acts of rebellion or rejection, but as quiet declarations of dignity. To set a boundary is not to say I don't love you, but to say I love myself enough to be honest about what I can and cannot carry. This distinction is crucial, yet it is frequently lost in families where sacrifice has long been confused with virtue and endurance mistaken for love. For many people, particularly parents, boundaries feel like betrayal because they disrupt a familiar pattern. For decades, the role has been to give, absorb, forgive, and adapt. Needs are postponed, emotions minimized, and discomfort normalized under the belief that love requires limitless availability. Over time, this belief becomes internalized so deeply that any deviation feels like moral failure. Saying no feels cruel. Asking for space feels ungrateful. Choosing peace feels like abandonment. But this mindset ignores a fundamental truth. Love that requires self-erasure is not sustainable, and sacrifice that is never chosen freely becomes a form of quiet harm. Later in life, boundaries take on even greater significance because the cost of not having them becomes impossible to ignore. The body grows less tolerant of stress. The mind grows tired of unresolved tension. The heart, having given so much, begins to demand reciprocity, not always from others, but from oneself. At this stage, boundaries are no longer theoretical concepts discussed in books or therapy sessions. They become survival tools. They protect emotional energy, mental clarity, and the right to live with intention rather than obligation. What makes boundaries so threatening to others is that they introduce clarity where ambiguity once allowed comfort. Silent sacrifice is easy for those who benefit from it. When someone absorbs disappointment without complaint, others are spared the responsibility of reflection. But clarity disrupts this dynamic. Clarity says, "This behavior affects me. This expectation is too heavy. This arrangement no longer works." These statements are not attacks, yet they often feel like accusations to those who have grown accustomed to unchecked access. True peace does not come from enduring discomfort quietly. It comes from alignment between values, actions, and emotional capacity. Silent sacrifice may keep relationships intact on the surface, but beneath that surface it breeds resentment, fatigue, and emotional withdrawal. Over time, the person who sacrifices becomes distant, not because they stopped caring, but because they were never allowed to exist fully within the relationship. Boundaries, by contrast, create the conditions for genuine presence. When a person knows they can say no without being punished, yes becomes meaningful again. There is also a generational dimension to this struggle. Many people were raised in environments where obedience was valued over authenticity, and harmony was maintained by avoiding difficult conversations. In such contexts, boundaries were seen as defiance, not health. Carrying these lessons into adulthood, especially into parent-child relationships, creates confusion when roles shift. Adult children expect autonomy, while parents continue to feel responsible, involved, and entitled to closeness without negotiation. When boundaries are introduced, they feel like rejection because the relationship was never recalibrated to reflect adulthood on both sides. Yet education, emotional education in particular, teaches that relationships must evolve to survive. What worked in childhood cannot govern adulthood. Boundaries are the mechanism of this evolution. They redefine connection from control to consent, from obligation to choice. They allow love to be expressed in ways that honor independence rather than undermine it. Without boundaries, relationships stagnate, trapped in outdated expectations that no longer fit the people involved. Another reason boundaries are labeled as betrayal is that they force accountability. When someone says, "I need space," or "I am not comfortable with this," it invites reflection. It asks others to consider their behavior, their assumptions, and their impact. This can be deeply uncomfortable, especially in families where authority went unquestioned for years. It is easier to frame the boundary setter as selfish, than to confront the possibility that harm was done, even unintentionally. But discomfort is not damage. In many cases, it is the beginning of growth. Boundaries also teach an important lesson about responsibility for emotions. Without boundaries, one person often becomes the emotional regulator for everyone else, smoothing conflicts, absorbing tension, and maintaining peace at their own expense. This dynamic is praised as selflessness, yet it robs others of the opportunity to manage their own feelings. When boundaries are set, others may feel disappointed, angry, or hurt. But these emotions belong to them. Allowing others to experience and process their feelings is not cruelty. It is respect for their emotional autonomy. It is important to recognize that boundaries do not eliminate love, they refine it. They strip away performance and obligation, leaving behind what is chosen freely. A relationship that survives boundaries is often stronger because it is rooted in mutual respect rather than fear of loss. Conversely, relationships that collapse under boundaries often reveal that they were sustained by imbalance, not connection. Later in life, setting boundaries can also be an act of teaching, not through lectures or arguments, but through example. When someone demonstrates that peace matters, that emotional well-being is worth protecting, and that self-respect is non-negotiable, they offer a powerful lesson to those around them. They show that adulthood includes the right to define one's limits, regardless of age or role. This lesson is particularly valuable in families, where patterns are often repeated across generations unless consciously interrupted. True peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of clarity. Clarity about what one needs, what one can offer, and what one will no longer tolerate. Silent sacrifice avoids conflict, but perpetuates confusion. Boundaries may invite temporary tension, but they create long-term stability. They replace unspoken expectations with honest agreements. They transform relationships from endurance tests into shared journeys. In the end, boundaries are not about pushing others away. They are about creating space where connection can breathe. They acknowledge that love without limits becomes consumption, and that giving without regard for self leads to depletion. Choosing boundaries later in life is not a withdrawal from love, but a return to balance. It is the understanding that peace earned through self-betrayal is not peace at all, and that the most enduring harmony is built not on silence, but on truth. Family reconciliation is often spoken about as if it were a moment, an embrace, a shared meal, a decision to move on. But in reality, reconciliation is a process, and like all meaningful processes, it demands effort, time, and accountability. When reconciliation is driven by convenience rather than responsibility, it may appear peaceful on the surface, while leaving the underlying fractures untouched. Wealth, comfort, proximity, or opportunity can create the illusion of healing, but they cannot replace the internal work required to truly mend a relationship. Convenience-based reconciliation usually begins when circumstances change. A parent becomes financially stable, a child needs support, a new home offers space, a crisis creates urgency. These moments can prompt reconnection, but they often bypass the deeper questions that reconciliation requires. What went wrong? What was said or left unsaid? Who was hurt, and how? Without addressing these questions, reconciliation becomes a transaction rather than a transformation. It is less about understanding and more about access. True reconciliation requires accountability, which is the willingness to acknowledge one's role in the breakdown of a relationship. Accountability does not mean self-blame or humiliation, it means honesty. It means recognizing that intentions do not erase impact. Many family conflicts persist not because people are cruel, but because they are unwilling to examine how their actions affected others. When accountability is absent, reconciliation asks the injured party to absorb the discomfort once again, reinforcing the same imbalance that caused the fracture in the first place. Rushing reconciliation is particularly tempting in families because of emotional history. Shared blood, memories, and obligations create pressure to restore closeness quickly, often under the banner of forgiveness or unity. But forgiveness without accountability is not healing, it is erasure. It asks the hurt person to forget their experience in order to preserve harmony. Over time, this erasure becomes a source of resentment, quietly poisoning the relationship from within. Healing requires space for truth, even when that truth disrupts the narrative of a happy family. Wealth and comfort can further complicate reconciliation by introducing power dynamics. Financial success can create leverage, intentionally or not. Offers of help, shared living arrangements, or access to resources may be framed as gestures of goodwill, but without emotional honesty, they risk becoming tools of control or avoidance. Material comfort can soften the edges of conflict, making it easier to ignore unresolved issues, but it cannot resolve them. Emotional wounds do not respond to luxury, they respond to recognition. Accountability also requires reflection, which is often the most uncomfortable part of reconciliation. Reflection means sitting with one's choices, examining patterns, and questioning long-held beliefs about roles and entitlement. In family systems, reflection can feel threatening because it challenges hierarchy and tradition. Parents may struggle to accept that they caused harm, believing that provision or sacrifice should exempt them from scrutiny. Adult children may resist examining their own withdrawal, defensiveness, or silence. Yet reconciliation cannot move forward unless all parties are willing to look inward as well as outward. Emotional honesty is the language of accountability. It involves naming feelings without accusation and listening without defense. This is not easy, particularly in families where communication has historically been indirect or suppressed. Emotional honesty requires vulnerability, and vulnerability carries risk. It opens the door to rejection, misunderstanding, or renewed conflict. But without it, reconciliation remains superficial. Politeness replaces intimacy, and proximity substitutes for connection. Another critical aspect of accountability is respect for timing. Not everyone heals at the same pace. One person may be ready to talk, while another is still processing pain. Forcing reconciliation before all parties are ready often results in performative peace. Outward cooperation masking inward resistance. Genuine healing respects emotional readiness. It allows space for boundaries, pauses, and gradual rebuilding, rather than demanding immediate closeness as proof of goodwill. Family reconciliation also requires a shift from entitlement to invitation. Entitlement assumes access by default, shared history justifies present demands. Invitation, by contrast, acknowledges autonomy. It says, "I would like to reconnect, and I respect your choice." This shift is central to accountability because it recognizes that reconciliation is not owed, it is earned through consistent, respectful behavior. When reconciliation is treated as an entitlement, it undermines trust. When it is offered as an invitation, it creates safety. Convenience-based reconciliation often collapses when circumstances change again, when the financial advantage disappears, when space becomes limited, or when expectations are unmet. Unresolved issues resurface with greater intensity. Accountability-based reconciliation, however, is resilient because it is grounded in understanding rather than benefit. It does not depend on external conditions to sustain itself. It is supported by mutual clarity about boundaries, responsibilities, and expectations. Education teaches us that healthy systems, whether families, organizations, or communities, are built on feedback and correction. Without accountability, systems stagnate or decay. Family systems are no different. Avoiding accountability may preserve short-term comfort, but it undermines long-term stability. Children learn from what is modeled, not what is preached. When reconciliation avoids responsibility, it teaches that conflict is managed through avoidance or leverage, rather than honesty and repair. It is also important to recognize that accountability does not guarantee reconciliation. Sometimes, after reflection and honesty, the conclusion is that distance is healthier than closeness. This outcome is often framed as failure, but it can be an act of wisdom. Reconciliation is not measured by physical proximity or frequency of contact, but by emotional integrity. Choosing limited contact or structured interaction can be a form of reconciliation when it is rooted in respect and self-knowledge. Ultimately, genuine family reconciliation is not about returning to how things were. It is about creating something new, something more conscious, balanced, and sustainable. It requires letting go of the fantasy that love alone is enough to heal wounds. Love must be accompanied by responsibility, humility, and effort. Convenience may open the door, but only accountability can keep it open. Healing, in this sense, is not a gift one person gives another. It is a shared commitment to truth, growth, and change. When families embrace accountability over convenience, reconciliation becomes more than a temporary truce. It becomes an opportunity for transformation, where relationships are rebuilt not on comfort or opportunity, but on trust earned through emotional honesty and sustained respect. Financial success is often treated as a universal remedy, a symbol that suggests arrival, redemption, and even emotional closure. In many cultures and families, money is seen not only as security but as proof of effort, sacrifice, and worth. When someone achieves financial stability or wealth, there is an unspoken expectation that past tensions should soften, resentments should dissolve, and relationships should naturally improve. Yet emotional history does not operate by the logic of economics. Material achievement may transform circumstances, but it does not rewrite memory, repair attachment wounds, or erase the impact of years lived without understanding, presence, or respect. Emotional history is cumulative. It is shaped by repeated interactions, patterns of behavior, and the meanings people assign to those experiences. Moments of neglect, dismissal, or emotional unavailability do not disappear simply because the present looks more comfortable. The nervous system remembers what the mind may try to minimize. A larger home cannot undo years of feeling unheard. Financial generosity cannot substitute for emotional reliability. When families attempt to use material success as a bridge over unresolved pain, they often discover that the bridge leads nowhere. One reason financial success is mistakenly seen as healing is because it creates visible change. New homes, improved lifestyles, and access to resources offer tangible evidence of progress. Emotional healing, by contrast, is subtle and slow. It requires conversations that are uncomfortable, admissions that challenge self-image, and patience that cannot be rushed. When these two processes are confused, families may prioritize what is easy to show over what is difficult to feel. The result is a mismatch, outward improvement paired with inward stagnation. Money can also complicate emotional history by introducing new dynamics of power and expectation. When one family member becomes financially successful, roles may shift abruptly. The successful individual may be viewed as a provider, a rescuer, or an authority figure, regardless of emotional readiness. Others may approach the relationship with entitlement, gratitude, or resentment, often all at once. These dynamics can reopen old wounds rather than heal them, especially if financial success becomes a substitute for emotional accountability. Unresolved emotional wounds do not require poverty to exist. They often become more visible in comfort. When survival is no longer the primary concern, emotional needs surface with greater clarity. A quiet home can amplify loneliness. Stability can make past instability feel more painful by contrast. Financial success creates space, but what fills that space depends on what has been addressed internally. Without emotional repair, the space fills with tension, unspoken grievances, and cautious distance. There is also the issue of transactional thinking. When material support is offered or implied, it can create an expectation of emotional access or forgiveness. This unspoken transaction, comfort in exchange for closeness, undermines genuine connection. Emotional history resists transactions because it is rooted in meaning, not exchange. A person who felt dismissed or disrespected over time does not heal because conditions improved. They heal when their experience is acknowledged as real and valid. Neglect in particular leaves a lasting imprint. It is not defined by dramatic events, but by absence, missed moments, unreturned attention, emotional unavailability. Financial success later in life may highlight this absence rather than compensate for it. When someone who once lacked emotional presence now offers material abundance, the contrast can intensify grief. It forces a confrontation with what was missing when it mattered most. Without addressing that grief, financial gestures may feel hollow or even intrusive. Past disrespect follows a similar pattern. Words spoken casually, boundaries ignored, autonomy dismissed. These experiences accumulate into an emotional narrative. Success does not change that narrative unless it is accompanied by reflection and changed behavior. Respect is demonstrated through consistency, listening, and willingness to change, not through improved circumstances. When families attempt to bypass this process, they often misinterpret emotional distance as ingratitude, further deepening the divide. Another misconception is that time combined with success equals healing. Time alone does not heal, it only creates distance from the original event. If the underlying issues are never addressed, time can harden them into identity. People adapt to emotional pain by building defenses, limiting vulnerability, and redefining expectations. Financial success may occur alongside these adaptations, but it does not dismantle them. In some cases, it reinforces them by providing the means to maintain distance more comfortably. Education about emotional development helps clarify why material improvement is insufficient. Emotional wounds require relational repair. They heal in the presence of empathy, accountability, and sustained effort. This repair cannot be outsourced to money or accelerated by comfort. It requires people to revisit moments they would rather forget, to listen without defending, and to accept that love expressed through provision may not have met emotional needs. This realization is often painful, but it is essential for growth. Financial success can, however, create an opportunity for healing if it is approached with humility rather than assumption. When material stability is used to create safety rather than leverage, it can support emotional work rather than replace it. Safety allows for honest conversation. Stability reduces stress that might otherwise block reflection, but this potential is only realized when success is accompanied by curiosity about others' experiences, not conclusions about what should be enough. Families often struggle with this distinction because gratitude is socially enforced. Those who benefit from improved conditions are expected to be thankful, and gratitude can silence truth. Expressing ongoing hurt in the face of generosity is often labeled as disloyal or unfair. This dynamic discourages emotional honesty and preserves unresolved pain. True reconciliation requires space for both gratitude and grief, both appreciation and accountability. Ultimately, emotional history is not erased, it is integrated. It becomes part of how people relate to one another moving forward. Financial success changes the setting, but not the story, unless the story is consciously revisited and revised. Ignoring emotional history does not neutralize it. It allows it to shape relationships invisibly, influencing trust, closeness, and communication in ways that are difficult to name but deeply felt. Understanding this truth is essential for anyone seeking genuine connection within family relationships. Material achievements are valuable, but they are not emotional currency. They cannot purchase trust, closeness, or forgiveness. These are earned through presence, respect, and sustained effort over time. When families recognize that financial success does not erase emotional history, they create the possibility for relationships grounded not in appearances or assumptions, but in authentic understanding and mutual care. Peace is often mistaken for physical closeness. Many people believe that sharing the same home, the same table, or the same daily routines will naturally lead to understanding and harmony. This belief is especially strong in families, where proximity has historically been used as a measure of unity. Yet living together does not guarantee peace. In many cases, it magnifies existing tensions. Emotional peace is not built through shared walls, but through shared respect. Without communication, autonomy, and regard for personal boundaries, proximity becomes pressure rather than comfort. Forced proximity tends to bypass consent. When people are expected to live together in the name of family, reconciliation, or tradition, the unspoken assumption is that closeness is owed rather than chosen. This assumption erodes respect because it ignores individual readiness, emotional capacity, and personal needs. Peace cannot emerge in an environment where presence is compulsory. True harmony requires that people want to be together, not that they feel obligated to be. Living together intensifies interaction. Every habit, tone, and preference becomes visible. Without mutual respect, these daily exposures turn minor differences into chronic irritations. What might be tolerable in brief encounters becomes unbearable when there is no space to retreat and regulate emotions. Emotional peace requires the ability to step back, reflect, and return with intention. When proximity eliminates that option, conflict becomes continuous rather than resolvable. Communication is the cornerstone of peaceful coexistence, yet proximity alone does not create it. In fact, constant closeness can reduce meaningful communication by replacing dialogue with assumption. People begin to expect others to anticipate their needs, moods, or boundaries simply because they share space. When those expectations are unmet, resentment grows silently. Respectful communication, by contrast, involves expressing needs clearly and listening without defensiveness. This kind of communication thrives in environments where autonomy is honored, not overridden. Autonomy is often misunderstood as distance or disengagement, but it is actually the foundation of healthy connection. When individuals are free to make choices about their time, space, and emotional involvement, they bring their best selves into relationships. Forced proximity strips away this freedom, making togetherness feel like surveillance rather than support. Peace requires that each person retains a sense of self within the relationship, rather than dissolving into roles defined by others. Respect for personal space is not a rejection of intimacy, it is a condition for it. Personal space allows for emotional processing, self-reflection, and recovery from stress. Without it, people become reactive rather than responsive. In shared living arrangements where space is not respected, conflicts often escalate not because issues are severe, but because individuals are emotionally depleted. Peace becomes impossible when there is no room to breathe. Many family conflicts arise from the belief that closeness should override comfort. This belief teaches people to endure rather than communicate, to tolerate rather than negotiate. Over time, endurance hardens into resentment, and tolerance turns into emotional withdrawal. Respect-based peace, on the other hand, encourages negotiation. It recognizes that different people have different needs for privacy, interaction, and independence. Honoring these differences is not divisive, it is stabilizing. Mutual respect also requires acknowledgement of changing roles. What worked at one stage of life may no longer be appropriate at another. Parents, children, partners all evolve over time. Forced proximity often freezes relationships in outdated dynamics, where authority, dependency, or obligation remain unexamined. This stagnation creates friction because it ignores growth. Peace emerges when relationships are updated to reflect current realities rather than past expectations. Shared walls can even become symbolic of unresolved power struggles. Who controls the space? Whose routines dominate? Whose needs are prioritized? Without explicit agreements, these questions are answered implicitly, often in ways that reinforce inequality. Emotional peace cannot exist in environments where one person's comfort consistently comes at the expense of another's. Respect requires conscious effort to distribute space, voice, and consideration fairly. It is also important to distinguish between isolation and intentional space. Choosing not to live together does not mean choosing disconnection. In many cases, distance allows relationships to flourish by reducing friction and increasing appreciation. When interactions are intentional rather than constant, people are more likely to engage with curiosity and patience. Peaceful relationships often depend not on how much time is spent together, but on the quality of that time. Education about emotional well-being emphasizes the role of self-regulation in healthy relationships. Self-regulation is difficult when individuals feel crowded, monitored, or overwhelmed. Proximity without respect disrupts this process by keeping people in a constant state of alertness. Peaceful environments support regulation by allowing individuals to manage their energy and emotions independently before re-engaging with others. Respect-based peace also involves recognizing that conflict is not the enemy. Avoiding conflict by enforcing closeness often backfires, creating an atmosphere where issues simmer beneath the surface. Healthy peace allows for disagreement, expression, and repair. This requires trust, which cannot be manufactured through proximity. Trust grows when people feel heard, valued, and free to express themselves without fear of retaliation or dismissal. Ultimately, peace is not about being together, it is about being well together. Shared walls do not create understanding, and proximity does not produce respect. These qualities must be cultivated intentionally through communication, autonomy, and mutual regard. When relationships honor personal space and emotional boundaries, closeness becomes a choice rather than a burden. In that choice, peace finds room to exist, not because people are forced to live together, but because they have learned how to live with respect.